She never meant to change his life. The nurse's fingers were shaking when she dialed, exhaustion blurring her vision as she squinted at the emergency contact form under the harsh fluorescent lights of Lagos University Teaching Hospital. It was 3:03 a.m., that hollow hour when the world feels abandoned and every sound echoes too loud. She pressed the numbers carefully, twice checking the scrawled digits, then held her breath as the line connected. This is a story about divine appointments disguised as human error, about how one misdialed number became the bridge between emptiness and belonging, between survival and truly living. It's about a single mother who thought she'd reached her end, a billionaire who'd forgotten how to feel, and a little girl whose faith outlasted every adult's cynicism. Before we journey through their collision of worlds, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me if you believe in fate. Because what you're about to hear will make you question whether coincidences even exist. Share this with someone who needs to remember that help sometimes arrives from the most unexpected places. Chike Nwosu wasn't sleeping. Sleep was a luxury he'd traded years ago for empire building, for board meetings that started at dawn, for acquisition deals that closed at midnight. His glass mansion on Banana Island sat like a crystal fortress overlooking Lagos. All clean lines and expensive emptiness. 42 years old, worth more money than 3 generations could spend, and lonelier than he'd ever admit to the business magazines that kept putting his face on their covers. He lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling where shadows played across imported Italian plaster, and wondered why success tasted so much like ashes. When his phone rang, he almost didn't answer. The number was local but unfamiliar, and at 3 a.m., unfamiliar numbers usually meant problems. But insomnia had made him reckless, so he swiped to accept. Hello. The voice on the other end was female, young, trembling with barely controlled panic. Mr. David Okon? This is Nurse Adebayo from LUTH. I'm calling about Amara Okafor. She's been admitted, unconscious, severe exhaustion, and malnutrition. We need you here immediately. Chike sat up slowly, his business mind automatically processing information. I think you have the wrong number. I'm not David Okon. There was a sharp intake of breath, then rustling papers. Oh God, I'm so sorry, I must have. But something in her voice stopped him from ending the call. The raw desperation, the barely suppressed fear. Wait, tell me about the patient. What happened? Nurse Adebayo hesitated, probably breaking a dozen protocols, but exhaustion makes people honest. She collapsed at a night cleaning job. Single mother. Her little girl is here in the corridor, alone, terrified. The real emergency contact isn't answering, and I don't know what to do with the child. I'm so sorry to have bothered you, sir. She was already apologizing, already retreating, but Chike found himself speaking. Which hospital? LUTH main campus. 5 minutes later, he was in his Mercedes, driving through the sleeping streets of Ikoyi. He couldn't explain it then. Couldn't articulate why a man who'd built his fortune on calculated risks suddenly threw logic out the window for a stranger. Maybe it was the hour, that thin veil time when souls feel undefended. Maybe it was the memory of his own mother, who'd worked 3 jobs after his father died, who'd collapsed once in a market and been saved by strangers' kindness. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the divine nudge people only recognize in hindsight. The roads were empty, street lights casting orange pools on asphalt, and Lagos felt almost peaceful in its rare quietness. LUTH's emergency wing was chaos contained, controlled pandemonium of beeping machines and hurried footsteps. Chike walked through the entrance in his designer pajamas and a hastily thrown-on jacket, drawing curious stares from the night staff. He found Nurse Adebayo at the station, exactly as exhausted as she'd sounded. I'm the wrong number, he said simply. Her eyes widened. Sir, you didn't have to. But he was already looking past her, to the corridor, to the small figure sitting on a plastic chair. Kayamika was 7 years old, with her mother's high cheekbones and eyes too old for her face. Her school uniform was rumpled and stained, one knee of her tights torn. She clutched a faded pink lunchbox with both hands like it was the last solid thing in a dissolving world, and when she looked up at Chike, he saw something that cracked the careful armor he'd spent decades building. Not hope. Not yet. Just the exhausted patience of a child who'd learned too young that adults often promised and rarely delivered. Hello, he said, crouching down to her level. the way his own father had done before cancer took him. My name is Chike. What's yours? She studied him with solemn suspicion. Kayamika, are you a doctor? Her voice was small but steady. He shook his head. No, I'm just someone who got a phone call and decided to come see if I could help. She processed this with a gravity that broke his heart. Mummy says strangers are dangerous. Smart woman, he thought. Your mummy is right. But Nurse Adebayo is here, and she knows I'm here, so you're safe. Can I sit with you while we wait for news? She nodded slowly, and he lowered himself onto the adjacent plastic chair. This billionaire tech mogul who'd pitched to Silicon Valley investors and closed deals worth millions, now sitting in a hospital corridor at 3:45 a.m. beside a terrified child. They didn't speak much. Kayamika swung her legs, heels tapping against the chair, a nervous rhythm. Chike checked his phone out of habit, saw 17 unread emails, and turned the screen off. Some things, he was learning, mattered more than quarterly projections. When the doctor finally emerged, dawn was threatening at the windows. She's stable. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, anemia. She needs rest, proper nutrition, and honestly, less stress. The doctor's tone carried accusation wrapped in clinical detachment. The bills, Chike stood. I'll handle it. Everything. Send the invoices to my office. He handed over a business card, watching the doctor's face shift from suspicion to shock as he read the name. Mr. Nwosu, that's very generous, but Chike cut him off gently. No conditions. Just help her. They let him see her briefly. Amara Okafor lay against white sheets, looking both younger and older than her 31 years. Beautiful even in exhaustion, with natural hair pulled back and the kind of bone structure that spoke of good genetics fighting a hard life. Her eyes fluttered open as he approached, confusion clouding them. Who are you? Her voice was barely a whisper. Chike smiled, and it felt strange on his face, like muscles remembering an old exercise. Just a wrong number who decided not to hang up. Amara was released 3 days later with strict instructions to rest, eat properly, and stop working herself to death. The doctor said it clinically, but his eyes held the exhausted sympathy of someone who'd seen too many women carrying impossible loads. She nodded obediently, already calculating how many shifts she'd miss, how far behind the rent would fall, how she'd stretch the last bag of rice. Then Nurse Adebayo handed her a discharge folder containing not just medical records, but something else. A handwritten note on expensive cardstock and a check that made her hands shake. The note read, for Kayamika's school fees and groceries. Not a loan, not charity, just someone passing forward a kindness once shown to him. Rest well. Zien, the check was for 200,000 naira. Amara stared at it until the numbers blurred, tears hot on her cheeks. Kayamika tugged her sleeve. Mummy, is that the man who sat with me? Her daughter's voice carried something Amara hadn't heard in months. Curiosity without fear, interest without the immediate calculation of cost. She folded the check carefully, unsure whether to cash it or frame it as evidence that miracles occasionally broke through. She cashed it. Poverty has a way of making philosophers practical. That afternoon, she and Kayamika went to ShopRite, and for the first time in 8 months, Amara filled a cart without mentally tallying every item. Rice, beans, tomatoes, fresh fish, eggs, bread that wasn't 2 days from expiry, yogurt for Kayamika, who squealed softly and hugged the container like treasure. Really, Mummy? Really? Amara nodded, throat too tight for words. In the checkout line, she caught their reflection in the security mirror, a thin woman and a little girl, both learning to stand a bit straighter under the weight of unexpected grace. But Chike didn't stop there. 4 days after her discharge, there was a knock at their one-room apartment in Bariga. Amara opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain lock engaged, and found him standing there in casual clothes that probably cost more than her annual salary, holding 2 Ghana must-go bags. Good afternoon, he said, as if wealthy men regularly visited decaying buildings where generator fumes mixed with cooking smoke. I brought a few things. May I come in? She should have said no. Should have protected her dignity. Should have questioned his motives. Should have done all the sensible things single mothers learn to do in a world that often preys on vulnerability. Instead, she unlatched the chain. It's not much, she said quietly, gesturing at the space that contained her entire world. A mattress on the floor, Kayamika's school corner with books stacked neatly, a two-burner stove, a plastic wardrobe. Chike's face remained neutral, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not pity. Something closer to recognition, like a man remembering a former country. He set the bags down gently. My mother raised me in a room smaller than this in Ajigunal. After my father died, we had even less. He said it simply, without performance, and Amara felt some of her defensive walls crack. These are basics. More groceries, some supplies for Kayamika's school, and vitamins the doctor said you should take. He glanced at Kayamika, who was peeking from behind her mother's legs. And maybe one or two things that aren't necessary, but might bring a smile. Kayamika's unnecessary items included a new lunchbox with cartoon characters, a set of colored pencils, and 3 Enid Blyton books that made the little girl gasp with joy. Amara's included prenatal vitamins, protein powder, and a journal with a note that read, "Write your thoughts. Stress lives smaller on paper." She looked up at him, this strange man who'd invaded their lives with precision kindness. "Why are you doing this?" Chike was quiet for a moment, watching Kayamika reverently touch her new books. "Honestly, I don't fully know yet. But when I sat with your daughter in that hospital, waiting with her while you fought to stay alive, I felt something I haven't felt in years. Purpose beyond profit. Connection beyond transaction. Let me keep feeling it a while longer." The visits became a pattern. Every Saturday morning, Chike would appear with groceries, sometimes with repair tools to fix their leaking ceiling or the door that wouldn't lock properly. He never stayed long, never imposed, but his presence began to fill spaces in their lives they hadn't known were empty. Kayamika started calling him Uncle Chike after the 3rd visit, and Amara stopped flinching at every knock, stopped waiting for the bill to come due. He asked about her life in careful increments, like someone approaching a nervous animal. She told him slowly. About teaching literature at a private secondary school until budget cuts eliminated her position. About David, Kayamika's father, who'd promised forever then vanished when pregnancy became visible. About taking night cleaning jobs at offices, day shifts washing dishes at a bookca, weekend sewing gigs, anything to keep Kayamika in decent school, and shoes that fit, in a childhood that didn't completely taste of desperation. Chike listened without interrupting, without offering empty reassurances, and somehow that made it easier to speak. "You were a teacher?" he asked one Saturday, sitting on their only chair while Kayamika did homework at his feet. "Are a teacher," Amara corrected quietly. "I haven't forgotten how, even if schools have forgotten me." Something shifted in his expression. What if they remembered? What if you went back? She laughed, but it was bitter. With what credentials update? What computer skills? The educational world moved on while I was surviving. Chike pulled out his phone, typed rapidly. "There's a coding boot camp for educators. Online, flexible schedule. I know the founder. Scholarship available." Amara felt that dangerous thing. Hope, starting to kindle. "Chike, you've already done too much." He looked up, and his eyes were serious. "I haven't done enough. Not to repay what I owe this world. Let me help you rebuild. Not as charity, as investment in someone who clearly knows how to fight." She wanted to argue, but Kayamika looked up from her mathematics with such bright expectation that the words died. "Mummy should teach again," her daughter said firmly. "She's the best teacher in the whole world." 2 weeks later, Amara was enrolled. The coursework was challenging, forcing her brain to stretch in new directions, but Chike sent his personal IT assistant twice a week to help her navigate the technical portions. She studied after Kayamika slept, her daughter's soft breathing a soundtrack to Python tutorials and database management lessons. It was exhausting. It was exhilarating. It was the first time in 3 years she'd thought about her future in terms beyond mere survival. Chike started staying for dinner sometimes. Nothing elaborate, jollof rice, fried plantain, whatever Amara managed after her studies. But he ate like it was a feast, and the conversation flowed easier each time. He told her about his company, about the loneliness of leadership, about building an empire and forgetting to build a life. She told him about Kayamika's brilliance, about dreams deferred, about the strange mathematics of loving someone so much that you'd erase yourself to keep them whole. They were, without quite meaning to, becoming friends. But in Lagos, where gossip travels faster than Danfo buses and everyone has opinions about everyone else's business, their friendship didn't go unnoticed. Amara's neighbors started whispering, "That rich man every weekend? You know what that means." The insinuation stung, but Chike told her simply, People who've never experienced kindness without strings will always assume strings. Let them talk. You know the truth. And she did. The truth was in Kayamika's improving grades, in Amara's growing confidence, in the way their small room felt less like a trap and more like a temporary station on a journey forward. 3 months after that wrong number call, Amara completed her boot camp with distinction. The certification ceremony was virtual, but Chaik and Kayamika made a banner that read, "Teacher of Tomorrow," and hung it in the apartment. They ate cake from a proper bakery, and for one evening, poverty felt like history instead of present tense. "You did this," Chaik said quietly, while Kayamika dozed against his shoulder. "I just opened a door. You walked through it." Amara met his eyes and saw something there that made her heart skip: respect, admiration, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. The job offer came on a Tuesday morning, arriving in Amara's email inbox like a wrapped gift she was afraid to open. Heritage Academy, one of Lagos's rising private schools in Lekki, needed a literature teacher with technology integration skills. The salary was triple what she'd earned before, and they offered health insurance, something she'd only dreamed about. Her hands trembled as she read it twice, 3 times, checking for the catch that poverty had trained her to expect. When none appeared, she called Chaik, her voice breaking. "I got it. They want me." His laugh was pure joy. "Of course they do. You're brilliant. When do you start?" She started the following Monday, wearing a dress Chaik had insisted on buying her. Professional, elegant, the kind of outfit that made her stand taller. Kayamika kissed her 17 times before school, counting each one carefully. "For good luck, Mummy. One for each year until I'm grown and can work to help you." Amara held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of the coconut oil she'd combed through her hair. "You helped me by being exactly who you are, my love." The words felt true in a way they hadn't months ago, when survival had sandpapered away the luxury of sentiment. Heritage Academy was everything her old school wasn't: modern classrooms, working projectors, students whose parents paid fees on time. Her colleagues were welcoming, if slightly curious about the new teacher who'd emerged from nowhere with impressive credentials. She taught things fall apart and purple hibiscus with renewed passion, watching her students' faces light up as literature revealed its power. During lunch breaks, she integrated coding exercises with literary analysis, having students build character relationship databases and plot structure algorithms. The principal, Mrs. Adelik, stopped by her classroom and smiled. "You're exactly what modern education needs." But it was the moment Kayamika visited on Parents' Day that truly mattered. Her daughter walked into Amara's classroom with wide eyes, taking in the bookshelves, the computers, the walls decorated with student work. "Mummy, you have your own desk, with your name on it." She traced the nameplate reverently. Mrs. A. Okafor, Literature and Technology. Other parents watched, some with polite smiles, others with the subtle distance that socioeconomic difference creates. Then Kayamika turned to the class and announced proudly, "My mummy is the best teacher in the world." She never gave up, even when things were really, really hard. The room went quiet. Then one of Amara's students, a normally quiet girl named Temi, started clapping. Others joined, and soon the entire classroom was applauding. For resilience, for comeback stories, for the universal truth that struggle doesn't disqualify anyone from excellence. Amara's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother hiding. "Thank you," she whispered to her daughter later, "for reminding me why I fought so hard." Kayamika hugged her waist. "Uncle Chaik says warriors don't hide their scars. They wear them like medals." Uncle Chaik. The name had stuck, becoming permanent fixture in their vocabulary and their lives. His Saturday visits had expanded to include Wednesday evening tutoring sessions where he helped Kayamika with mathematics while Amara prepared lessons. He'd moved them to a proper 2-bedroom apartment in Suralere, closer to your school, safer neighborhood, non-negotiable, and refused to accept rent. "Consider it part of my investment portfolio," he'd said with that slight smile that made her stomach flutter. "I'm betting on your success, and smart investors protect their assets." But something was shifting between them, subtle as morning light changing the color of walls. The way his hand lingered when passing her a cup of tea. The way she found herself choosing outfits wondering if he'd notice. The way Kayamika would conveniently fall asleep during movie nights, leaving them talking in soft voices about dreams and fears and all the things adults hide until safety permits honesty. Neither spoke of it directly, both too aware of the delicate balance they'd built, both terrified of disrupting the peace they'd found. One evening, after Kayamika was asleep, they sat on the small balcony of the new apartment, watching Lagos's chaotic beauty spread below them. "Can I tell you something?" Amara asked quietly. Chike turned to her, his face gentle in the lamplight. "Always." She took a breath. "I'm terrified that I'll wake up and this will all have been a dream. That I'll be back in that one room, alone, drowning. That kindness this pure can't possibly be real." He was quiet for a long moment, then reached over and took her hand. "I'm terrified too. Terrified that you'll realize you don't need me anymore and disappear. That this feeling, this wholeness I've found here with you and Kayamika, will evaporate." Their eyes met, and the air between them crackled with unspoken truths. "Chike, but he shook his head gently. "You don't have to say anything yet. We have time. For the first time in both our lives, we actually have time." She squeezed his hand, grateful for his patience, grateful for his presence, grateful for the way he saw her, not as a project or a charity case, but as a woman worthy of respect, partnership, and maybe something deeper. Kayamika's transformation was equally remarkable. Her grades, which had been suffering under the weight of worry, soared to the top of her class. She joined the school's debate team and discovered a gift for public speaking that left her teachers astounded. Where did this confidence come from? Her class teacher asked during a parent-teacher conference. Amara glanced at Chike, who'd insisted on attending, and smiled. She stopped being afraid. When children feel secure, their brilliance has room to breathe. The three of them developed rhythms and rituals. Sunday breakfast at Chike's mansion, proper family affairs with pancakes, bacon, and Kayamika's endless chatter about school. Monthly bookstore trips where Kayamika could choose any 3 books she wanted. Evening walks around the neighborhood where they discuss everything from politics to poetry. They looked, to outside observers, like a family. And increasingly, that's what they felt like, not by blood or legal document, but by the deeper bonds of chosen commitment and shared healing. Chike's business associates noticed the change in him. He smiled more in meetings, delegated better, stopped treating every quarter like a battle to be won. His assistant commented that he seemed more human somehow, and he'd laughed. "I'm remembering what it feels like to be alive instead of just successful." He started a scholarship program through his foundation, specifically for single mothers returning to education, and named it the Amara Initiative. When she protested, he said simply, "You showed me what courage actually looks like. Let me honor that." But in the background, unnoticed by their growing happiness, trouble was brewing. In a small apartment in Festac town, David Okon scrolled through Facebook and saw a photo someone had tagged. Amara, Kayamika, and an unknown man at a restaurant, all smiling. The caption read, "Family Goals." David stared at the image, jealousy and entitlement mixing into toxic determination. He'd walked away when fatherhood got difficult. Now that things looked comfortable, he wanted back in. He began making calls, crafting a narrative, preparing his return. The storm was gathering, and the family that had just learned to breathe was about to face their greatest test. Amara sensed nothing. That Friday evening, she graded papers while Chike helped Kayamika build a science project about solar systems. Her daughter's laughter rang through the apartment, pure and frequent, the sound of childhood reclaimed. Chike caught her eye and smiled, and she smiled back, her heart full of cautious joy. She'd learned not to trust permanence, but she was learning to embrace presence. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. For now, this moment was enough. This beautiful, hard one, perfectly imperfect moment of peace. David Okon arrived on a Saturday morning with flowers and audacity, both purchased from vendors who didn't ask questions. He'd rehearsed his lines during the entire drive from Festac, practicing the wounded father routine in his rearview mirror. When he knocked on Amara's door, she was preparing breakfast while Kayamika set the table, both humming the same tune without realizing it, the unconscious harmony of people who'd learned to be happy. The knock shattered that peace like a stone through glass. Amara opened the door and froze. 7 years collapsed into seconds. The promises, the abandonment, the night he'd looked at her growing belly and said, "I'm not ready for this," then disappeared like smoke. He'd aged poorly, she noticed with detached clarity. The charming boy she'd loved had become a man whose eyes held calculation instead of warmth. "Hello, Amara," he said, extending the flowers like they were negotiations instead of apology. "We need to talk." She didn't take them. "We have nothing to discuss. Leave." But Kayamika had heard his voice and came to the doorway, curiosity overriding caution. "Who is this, mummy?" David's face transformed into performed emotion. "Kayamika? My God, look how big you are. I'm your father, sweetheart. I've missed you so much." The lie was smooth as oil, but Kayamika stepped backward, pressing against her mother's side. "I don't have a father. I have Mummy and Uncle Chike." The words hit David like a slap, and his mask slipped briefly, showing the anger beneath. "Uncle Chike? Who is Uncle Chike?" Amara's voice turned cold as steel. "Someone who was there? Unlike you. Now leave before I call security." But David didn't leave. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot, Chike's Wikipedia page, complete with net worth estimates and business empire details. "So you traded up. Smart. From a struggling nobody to a billionaire. How long did it take you to get your hooks in?" The accusation was designed to wound, to reduce her resurrection to transaction. Amara felt rage rise, volcanic and purifying. "Get out. Now, or I'll have you removed." David smiled, and it was ugly. "I'm Kayamika's legal father. My name is on her birth certificate. I have rights, Amara, and I'm going to exercise them." He left, but the poison remained. That afternoon, while Chike was at a board meeting he couldn't miss, David made his move. He called Lagos Talk, a notorious gossip blog that specialized in scandal and innuendo. His story was carefully crafted. Billionaire Chike Nwosu using wealth to manipulate vulnerable single mother, alienating child from biological father. The headline went live by evening, complete with photos David had pulled from social media, Amara and Chike at restaurants, at bookstores, at Kayamika's school events. Context was stripped away, leaving only implications. By the time Chike saw the article, it had been shared 8,000 times. His phone exploded with calls from his PR team, his board members, concerned friends. He read the piece with growing fury, not at the damage to his reputation, but at the violation of Amara's privacy, the weaponizing of her struggle. David had painted her as a gold digger, a woman using her child to trap a wealthy man, and Kayamika as a pawn in adult games. The comments section was predictably vicious, strangers rendering judgment on lives they knew nothing about. He drove straight to Amara's apartment, finding her sitting on the couch, staring at her phone with tears streaming silently down her face. Kayamika was at a friend's house, spared this particular cruelty. "I'm so sorry," Amara whispered when she saw him. "I never meant for your name to be dragged through." Chike crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "Stop. This isn't your fault. This is a bitter man trying to destroy what he abandoned because he can't stand to see you happy." She shook her head. "But your reputation, your business," he squeezed her hands. "We'll survive. The only question is, will you let him win?" The next 72 hours were warfare. David gave interviews painting himself as the devoted father kept from his child by a wealthy interloper. He hired a lawyer and filed for joint custody, weaponizing the legal system. Social media divided into camps, those who saw through his performance and those who loved a scandal more than truth. Chike's PR team wanted him to distance himself, to issue a statement denying romantic involvement, to protect the brand. He refused. "I won't abandon them. Not for optics, not for profit, not for anything." Instead, he did something unexpected. He called a press conference, and Amara, terrified but resolute, stood beside him. The room was packed with journalists and cameras, all hungry for blood. Chike spoke first, his voice calm, but carrying steel underneath. 7 months ago, I received a phone call intended for someone else. It led me to a hospital, to a woman fighting to survive, to a child sitting alone in a corridor. I could have walked away. I didn't. What grew from that moment isn't scandal, it's family. Not the kind biology assigns, but the kind we choose through action and commitment. Then Amara spoke, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger. "David Ocone abandoned us when I was 4 months pregnant. He blocked my calls, changed his number, erased us from his life. For 7 years, he paid no child support, sent no birthday cards, made no effort to know his daughter. Now that circumstances have changed, he claims paternity like it's a trophy he can pick up when convenient. But fatherhood isn't DNA. It's showing up. It's sitting through 3 a.m. hospital waits. It's homework help and school fees, and choosing another human's well-being over your own comfort. By those standards, Chike has been more father to Kayamika in 7 months than David was in 7 years. The room erupted with questions, but one journalist from The Guardian asked the only one that mattered. Mr. Okon claims you're using your wealth to manipulate this family. What do you say to that? Chike looked directly into the camera. I say love doesn't manipulate. Love serves. Love shows up. Love stays. And yes, I love them. Both of them. If that's scandalous, then scandal me. Amara turned to him, shock and hope warring on her face. He met her eyes. I should have said it sooner, but I was afraid. I'm not afraid anymore. The press conference video went viral, but this time the narrative shifted. People who'd judged harshly began to reconsider. Mothers who'd struggled alone shared their own stories of abandonment and unexpected angels. Think pieces appeared about modern family structures and the poverty of equating biology with belonging. David's lawyer quietly withdrew the custody petition when a background check revealed David had 2 other children he'd also abandoned, facts that would destroy his case in court. He issued no statement, simply slinking back into obscurity, his 15 minutes of malicious fame exhausted. But something else emerged from the scandal's ashes, a document that would reframe everything they thought they knew. Chike's mother had passed 3 years prior, and while settling her estate, his lawyers had archived boxes of old papers. Reviewing everything after the media storm, looking for any other vulnerability David might exploit, they found a folder labeled Important Documents, 1987. Inside was a faded loan approval form from the Lagos State Civil Service Credit Union, signed by the reviewing officer, J.O. Okafor. The name meant nothing to the lawyers. To Chike, it was lightning strike revelation. Chike sat in his office at midnight, the city spread below him like scattered diamonds, and stared at the yellowed paper that had just rewritten his understanding of fate. The loan approval was dated March 12, 1987, stamped and signed in the careful handwriting of a man who took bureaucracy seriously. Application for emergency small business loan. Mrs. Grace Nwosu, widow, market trader, Ajagunal. Amount, 15,000 naira. Reviewing officer, Joseph Olufemi Okafor. Approved with notation. Applicant demonstrates exceptional character and community standing despite current hardship. Recommend approval. His hands trembled as he picked up his phone and called Amara, not caring that it was approaching 1 a.m. She answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep but instantly alert. Chike, what's wrong? He could barely speak past the tightness in his throat. Your father. What was his full name? Confused silence. Then, Joseph Olufemi Okafor. He worked for the civil service until he died when I was 12. What? Chike closed his eyes, and decades collapsed into a single perfect moment of understanding. I need to see you. Now. I need to tell you something that will change everything. 20 minutes later, she sat in his living room wearing a hastily thrown-on wrapper and headscarf, barefoot and bewildered, while Chike spread the documents on his coffee table like sacred texts. He told her the story he'd heard countless times from his mother before Alzheimer's stole her memories. How his father died suddenly in 1986, leaving Grace Nwosu with 3 children, no savings, and a tiny market stall selling provisions. How the bigger traders started squeezing her out. How loan sharks circled offering help at devastating interest rates. How she'd applied for a government small business loan as a last desperate gamble. Most applications were denied. Chike explained, his voice rough with emotion. The system was corrupt, favoring those with connections or bribe money. My mother had neither. She'd prepared herself for rejection, had started planning which child she'd have to pull from school first. He pushed the loan approval toward Amara. Then this man reviewed her application. Your father. He didn't just approve it. He wrote a personal recommendation. He put his reputation on the line for a woman he'd never met, simply because it was right. Amara picked up the document with shaking hands, tracing her father's signature. Tears spilled onto the paper, blooming like flowers across decades. I remember him talking about his work. He'd come home exhausted, frustrated with the corruption he saw daily. But he'd say, Amara, when you have the power to help someone, and you don't, you've used that power to hurt them. I didn't understand then. I was just a child. She looked up at Chike, understanding dawning like sunrise. This loan saved your family. It saved my destiny, Chike corrected quietly. With that money, my mother expanded her business. She eventually opened 3 stalls, then a small shop. She put all of us through school. I got into university, studied computer science, started my first tech company with money she loaned me from her savings. Everything I am, everything I've built, traces back to that moment when your father decided one widow's struggle mattered more than bureaucratic convenience or personal risk. He stood, walking to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Do you understand what this means? Amara joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. It means that 3 a.m. phone call wasn't random. Her voice was barely a whisper. It means heaven has a longer memory than we do, Chike agreed. Your father gave my mother a chance when no one else would. 38 years later, I received a misdialed call that led me to his daughter, struggling in exactly the same way my mother once struggled. You thought you called the wrong number, but Amara, he turned to face her fully, cupping her face gently in his hands. Heaven never dials wrong. She leaned into his touch, years of defensive walls finally crumbling completely. All this time, I thought I was taking from you, accepting charity I didn't deserve. He shook his head. You were letting me pay a debt I didn't even know I owed. You were giving me purpose, family, love, things all my success never bought. If anyone is in debt here, it's me. They stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, 2 people whose parents' intersection decades ago had created a bridge across time, across circumstance, across everything that tried to keep them separate. I want to show you something else, Chike said, leading her to his home office. He pulled out a leather-bound album his mother had kept, filled with photographs from the late 80s. There were pictures of the market stall, of Grace Nwosu standing proud beside her growing inventory, of 3 children in school uniforms, Chike and his siblings. Then he found the photo he'd been searching for, his mother at a civil service appreciation ceremony in 1988, shaking hands with various officials. And there, in the background, slightly out of focus but unmistakable, was a younger Joseph Okafor. They met. Amara breathed, staring at the image. At least once. Chike nodded. My mother mentioned going to that ceremony to thank the man who'd approved her loan. She said he'd been humble about it, insisting he'd just done his job. She told me, that man saved our lives, and he acted like it was nothing special. That's real integrity, Chike. Remember that. He carefully closed the album. I built an empire trying to live up to her memory, but I'd forgotten the lesson she was actually teaching. That true wealth is measured in lives touched, not accounts balanced. As Dawn began painting Legos in shades of gold and rose, they made coffee and sat together, piecing together the invisible threads that had woven their families together across time. Joseph Okafor had died of a heart attack when Amara was 12, collapsing at his desk after a long day fighting bureaucratic corruption. Grace Nwosu had died of Alzheimer's 3 years ago, but not before seeing her son become a billionaire. Neither parent had lived to see this moment, but somehow, their choices had conspired to create it. What do we tell Kayamika? Amara asked softly. Chike smiled. We tell her the truth. That her grandfather was a hero who never knew his own impact. That kindness echoes across time. That the love we choose is no less real than the love we inherit. He paused, then took her hand. And we tell her that I'd like to make this official. Not because I'm paying debts or finding redemption, but because I can't imagine my life without either of you in it. Amara's breath caught. Chike, are you? He knelt down, right there in his living room with the sunrise streaming through the windows, and pulled out a small box he'd been carrying in his pocket for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. I'm saying I want to be family in every sense. I want to adopt Kayamika legally, give her my name, be the father she deserves. And I want you to be my wife, my partner, my home. Not because fate arranged it, but because we chose it. Will you choose me back? She pulled him to his feet, laughing and crying simultaneously, and kissed him with all the joy and relief and love she'd been holding back for months. Yes, to all of it. Yes. They held each other as Lagos woke up around them, as the city that had witnessed both their struggles and their redemption began another day. Somewhere in the intersection of past and present, 2 fathers, one who'd shown mercy to a stranger, one who'd shown up for a misdialed call, had collaborated across decades to write a love story neither could have predicted. The wedding happened 3 months later on a December morning when Lagos felt almost cool, the Harmattan haze softening the city's sharp edges into something dreamlike. They kept it small, Chike's siblings and their families, Amara's cousins who'd stayed in touch through the hard years, close friends, and most importantly, Kayamika, who served as both flower girl and ring bearer because she'd insisted she needed 2 jobs to properly celebrate. Heritage Academy had given Amara time off, though her students had created a massive congratulations banner that now hung in Chike's living room. The ceremony took place in the garden of the Banana Island mansion, under a canopy of white roses and purple orchids. But the moment that mattered most came the night before, during the traditional introduction ceremony. Chike had arranged for a surprise. He'd tracked down 3 of Joseph Okafor's former colleagues, elderly civil servants who remembered the man with fierce affection. They came to the ceremony wearing their old service badges, and one by one, they told stories. Joseph was the only honest man in that entire department, said Mr. Adeyemi, 83 and sharp as ever. He'd argue with supervisors on behalf of ordinary people. Cost him promotions, cost him favor, but he never bent. Another colleague added, when he died at his desk, he was reviewing applications for market women's cooperatives, working late because he wanted to approve as many as possible before the Christmas break. Amara wept openly, and Kayamika, who'd been told the full story of her grandfather's long-ago kindness and its present-day harvest, sat between her mother and soon-to-be father with a solemnity beyond her 8 years. My grandfather was a superhero, she announced to the gathering. He saved Uncle Chike's family, and Uncle Chike saved ours, and now we're all family together. That's how superpowers work. The room erupted in applause and laughter, and even the elderly civil servants dabbed at their eyes. The wedding itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Amara wore a cream lace dress that made her look like something between a queen and a sunrise, with Kayamika's hand-drawn designs embroidered along the hem, flowers and books and stars. Chike wore traditional agbada in deep blue, and when he saw Amara walking toward him, his composure cracked and tears fell freely. The officiant, a professor of literature who'd once taught Amara at university, kept the ceremony short but meaningful. We gather today to witness not just a marriage, but a redemption. To celebrate not just love, but legacy. To honor the truth that kindness is never wasted. It simply waits for its season to bloom. When they exchanged vows, Chike went off script. Amara, you taught me that wealth without purpose is just comfortable emptiness. You showed me what courage actually looks like, not in boardrooms or investment deals, but in getting up every day to fight for the people you love. I promise to honor your strength, to cherish your daughter as my own, and to spend every day worthy of the second chance your father unknowingly gave my family. His voice broke. I promise to answer every call, no matter how unexpected, for the rest of our lives. Amara's vows were equally raw. Chike, you appeared in my darkest hour like an answered prayer I didn't know how to pray. You saw me, not my poverty, not my struggle, not my usefulness, but me. You gave Kayamika and me not just resources, but dignity. Not just help, but partnership. I promise to build this life with you as equals, to remind you daily that you are loved not for what you provide, but for who you are, and to make sure our home always has space for the next person who needs someone to answer their call. The adoption papers were signed during the reception, with Kayamika officially becoming Kayamika Okafor Nwosu. She'd insisted on keeping Okafor as a middle name. Grandfather's name goes with me everywhere, she'd explained seriously. When the judge, a friend of Chike's who'd volunteered to officiate, handed her the certificate, Kayamika studied it carefully, then looked up at Chike with eyes full of wonder. Does this mean you're my real daddy now? He knelt down, this man who commanded boardrooms and closed Billionaire deals, and his voice was gentle. I'm your real daddy because I choose you and you choose me. The paper just makes it official for everyone else. 6 months into their marriage, they established the Joseph Okafor Foundation for Single Parents, funded initially with 50 million naira from Chike's personal wealth. The foundation offered business loans, educational scholarships, emergency medical assistance, and, most crucially, childcare support so single parents could work or study without the impossible choice between income and supervision. Amara ran it part-time while continuing to teach, bringing both her lived experience and her administrative skills. The first loan recipient was a widow from Ajagunal with a small food business, and when Amara handed her the approval letter, she thought of her father's careful handwriting across decades and understood that legacies aren't inherited, they're continued. Kayamika thrived in ways that still astonished them. She'd started a school club called the Wrong Number Project, where students performed random acts of kindness for strangers, documenting how small gestures rippled outward. Her essay about her family's story won a national youth writing competition, and she used the prize money to buy books for the library at her mother's old neighborhood school in Bariga. When a journalist asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up, she answered without hesitation. Someone who answers when people call for help. Like my daddy. Like my grandfather I never met. 1 year after the wedding, on a Saturday morning that felt ordained by mercy, the three of them stood on the balcony of the Banana Island mansion, the same balcony where Chaik had once stood alone, staring at success without satisfaction. Now it held a family. Amara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, while Kayamika sat at their feet reading a Chimamanda Adichie novel, occasionally reading favorite passages aloud. The Lagos Lagoon stretched before them, morning light turning the water to liquid gold. Do you ever think about that night? Amara asked softly. The call that started everything? Chaik pulled her closer. Every single day? I think about all the ways I almost didn't answer. How I nearly declined the call, nearly hung up when I realized it was a mistake, nearly talked myself out of driving to the hospital. He paused, emotion thick in his throat. I think about the universe's patience in arranging everything. Your father's integrity 38 years ago, my mother's gratitude, your struggle, my emptiness, one nurse's exhausted mistake, into this moment right here. Kayamika looked up from her book. Mrs. Adelik says some people call it coincidence, but really it's providence wearing a disguise. She said it matter-of-factly, then returned to her reading, leaving the adults to marvel at the wisdom children sometimes channel. Chaik and Amara exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that married people develop, that said everything and nothing. That meant we made it. We're here, we're home. You know what I learned? Chaik said, his voice carrying the weight of earned wisdom. I spent 20 years building an empire because I thought success would fill the holes in me. But empire building is lonely architecture. You can construct monuments to your achievement and still die of isolation inside them. He gestured at the mansion, at the view, at everything his wealth had purchased. None of this meant anything until it became a place where love lived. You didn't need my money, Amara. You needed someone to see you. And I needed someone to teach me that being seen is worth more than being celebrated. Below them, Lagos hummed with its particular chaos. Traffic horns and generator rumbles and market calls, and the million small sounds of people surviving, striving, struggling, succeeding. It was the city that had tested them both, that had stripped them to essentials, that had prepared them for each other. Sometimes I think about the other men that nurse could have called, Amara mused. What if the wrong number had gone to someone who just hung up? Or someone who helped once and then disappeared? Chaik shook his head. It wouldn't have been the wrong number then. It was meant for me specifically. Your father gave my mother a future. I got to give his daughter one. That's not chance. That's mathematics beyond our understanding. They stayed there as morning stretched toward afternoon, talking about everything and nothing, about Kayamika's upcoming debate competition, about the foundation's next round of loan approvals, about whether to adopt a dog even though Chaik was mildly allergic, about paint colors for the nursery they were preparing because Amara was 3 months pregnant with a son they'd already decided to name Joseph. Life unfolding in its beautiful mundanity, made sacred by presence and choice and the daily decision to keep showing up for each other. As the sun reached its apex, Chaik turned to face Amara fully, taking both her hands in his. You thought you called the wrong number at 3 in the morning when everything felt impossible, he said softly, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that still made her breath catch. But Amara, heaven never dials wrong. Every digit was exactly where it needed to be. Every number a breadcrumb on a path laid decades before we were ready to walk it. You didn't call wrong. You called home. You just didn't know it yet. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, while Kayamika made exaggerated gagging sounds that dissolved into giggles. And somewhere beyond the veil that separates the living from those who've gone before, perhaps 2 parents, a civil servant who chose integrity and a market woman who chose gratitude, smile that the garden their choices had finally grown. The phone call that should have been a mistake became an invitation. The wrong number became the right destiny. And 3 people who'd been alone learned that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the beautiful accident that stops being accidental the moment you choose to answer. Dear listeners, this story teaches us that no act of kindness is ever wasted. It simply waits for its appointed time to bloom. Joseph Okafor never knew that signing one loan approval in 1987 would save his own daughter decades later. Chike Nwosu never imagined that answering a wrong number would lead him to purpose, family, and love. Amara never guessed that her darkest moment would be the doorway to her greatest blessing. You've got this, friend. Whatever struggle you're facing, whatever impossible situation has you calling out at 3 a.m., remember, the help you need might come from the most unexpected place. Keep showing up. Keep being kind. Keep answering the calls, literal and metaphorical, that pull you toward other people's pain. In a world obsessed with success, be someone who values significance. In a culture that worships wealth, be someone who understands that the richest life is one spent in service to others. Your kindness is writing stories you'll never read, planting gardens you may never see bloom. Trust the process anyway. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to remember that divine appointments sometimes arrive disguised as human mistakes. Drop a comment telling us about a time an unexpected connection changed your life. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, remember, heaven never dials wrong. You're exactly where you need to be.